Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 disturbing stories from people who booked Airbnbs deep in the Smoky Mountains and found something waiting for them in those old hollows. These are tales of vacationers, family travelers, and weekend renters who thought a quiet cabin in Tennessee or North Carolina would be the perfect getaway. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Story 1. I grew up in Asheville, so the Smokies were never some mysterious place to me. They were just the backdrop of my childhood, the wall of blue ridges you could see from the parking lot of any grocery store. I think that's why, when my husband Doran suggested we rent a cabin near Cataloochee for our anniversary, I didn't think twice. I'd been putting off planning anything for weeks. He found a little place on Airbnb that was advertised as off-grid charm, restored 1920s homestead. The photos showed yellow lamplight on a porch and a quilt thrown over a rocking chair. It looked exactly like the kind of place my grandmother used to talk about visiting as a girl. We drove up on a Friday in October. I remember because the leaves were doing that thing where the ridges look like they're on fire. The directions got weirder the deeper we went. Pavement turned to gravel, gravel turned to dirt, and the dirt road kept narrowing until I was sure we'd taken a wrong turn. Doran kept saying, "It's gotta be just past the next bend." He was eating sunflower seeds out of a bag on his lap, spitting the shells into a paper cup. I remember the cup tipping over twice and him laughing about it. Stupid stuff. Stuff I shouldn't even remember. The cabin sat in a clearing with no other structures in sight. A tin roof, river stone chimney, and a dog trot porch wrapping around 2 sides. The host had left a key under a planter and a note that said water pump sticks, jiggle handle twice. That was it. No phone number, no Wi-Fi password, nothing. Doran thought it was charming. I thought it was cold inside, even though the afternoon sun was hitting the front windows. That first night was fine, mostly. We grilled hot dogs over the fire pit and drank wine out of jelly jars we found in the cupboard. I noticed there were a lot of jars in that kitchen, way more than 2 people would need. Mason jars, jelly jars, little brown apothecary bottles lined up in neat rows on the highest shelf. I asked Doran if he thought the owner did canning. He shrugged. He was always better at not thinking about things than I was. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up because I heard humming, not from inside the cabin, from under it. There was a crawl space beneath the floor. I'd seen the lattice skirt around the foundation when we pulled in, and someone was humming a tune down there. Slow, off-key, almost a lullaby. I told myself it was the pipes. Old houses do that, or maybe an animal. A possum getting stuck in something, but possums don't carry a melody. I shook Doran awake. By the time he was up, it had stopped. He listened with me for maybe 10 minutes, and then he gave me that look husbands give when they want to be patient but are tired. He said it was probably the wood settling. He went back to sleep. I didn't. I lay there listening, and around 4 the humming started again, closer this time. Like whatever was making it had moved across the crawl space toward the bedroom side of the cabin. I held my breath. The boards under the bed creaked just once, like something pressed up against them from below. I think it was Saturday morning when things really started. Or maybe it was still Friday, technically, since we hadn't really slept. We made coffee. The coffee tasted like burnt plastic, no matter how much sugar I put in. Doran went outside to check the water pump. He came back 10 minutes later with his face the color of old paper and asked me to come look at something. Around the foundation skirt of the cabin, in the dirt where the lattice met the ground, were dozens of small handprints, child-sized, bare, pressed in deep like whoever made them had been pushing up against the wood from underneath, trying to get out. The prints were on the inside of the skirt, not the outside. They were facing the cabin. Doran said maybe kids were playing under here. I just looked at him. He knew. He just didn't want to say it. We started packing. We didn't say we were leaving. We just both started gathering our stuff quietly, like if we said it out loud something would hear us. While I was zipping my bag, I heard a soft thump from the kitchen. When I went in, one of the apothecary bottles from the high shelf was sitting on the table, upright, the lid off. There was a single baby tooth inside it. I didn't scream. I think I was past screaming. I just walked out to the car. Doran came out a minute later carrying the rest of our bags, and he was crying without really seeming to know it. He'd pulled the truck up to the porch. As we backed out of the clearing, I looked in the side mirror. The lattice skirt around the cabin was bowing outward in 3 places, like something inside was leaning into it, watching us go. We drove all the way back to Asheville without stopping. Doran got a speeding ticket on I-40 and didn't even argue with the trooper. When I unpacked our duffel that night, there was a small handprint pressed into the bottom of my sweatshirt in dirt that wouldn't wash out no matter how many times I ran it through the machine. I threw the sweatshirt away. The Airbnb listing was gone within a week. I checked. I'm not saying I understood what was down there. I'm saying I started to think I understood it. And then I realized I didn't, and that was worse than not knowing at all. Story 2. You'd think after a few years working in IT you'd jump at any chance to get away from a screen, and that's exactly what I told my coworker Rents when he asked why I'd booked a solo trip in November. The cabin was outside Townsend, Tennessee, listed as a writer's retreat. I'm not a writer. I just wanted 4 days where nobody could call me. I'm Holloway, by the way, Holloway Pike, and I grew up in Indiana, so the mountains felt exotic to me. Foreign, even. I think that's important to mention because I didn't know any of the local stories. I had nothing to be afraid of going in. The cabin was small, 1 bedroom, a loft, a wood stove. The host, a woman named Beatrix, met me at the Trailhead Road in a dented Subaru and walked me up the last quarter mile because vehicles couldn't make the grade. She was in her 60s, maybe, with a gray braid down her back. She showed me the stove, the propane stove, the outhouse. There was an outhouse, which she disclosed in the listing, and then she stopped on the porch and pointed at the tree line. "If you hear someone calling you by name from that direction," she said, gesturing northwest, "don't answer, don't go look. Just come inside and shut the door." Laughed. I thought it was a bit like the haunted hayride version of Watch Out for Bears. She didn't laugh back. She just nodded once and walked back down the trail to her Subaru. The first 2 days were genuinely nice. I read part of a paperback I'd brought, ate canned chili, watched the woods turn from gold to bare. I wrote a few things in a notebook, not anything good, just observations. The way the light hit the ridge at 4:30. The sound of a woodpecker that kept working on the same dead pine. Boring stuff. The kind of stuff you only remember because of what came after. On the 3rd night, around 11, I heard someone call my name from the northwest tree line. Holloway. It was my mother's voice. My mother, who has lived in Fort Wayne for 37 years and has never been within 500 miles of those mountains. The voice was clear, almost cheerful, like she was calling me in for dinner. I was sitting on the couch when I heard it. I remember my hand was halfway to a glass of water. I just froze with my hand in the air. Beatrix's warning came back to me so hard it almost felt like she was speaking it in my ear. "Holloway, honey, come here a second. I'd like to tell you I was brave. I tried to convince myself it was a neighbor or a hiker or a recording. There was no neighbor for 2 miles. There were no hikers in November at 11 at night, and it kept calling. Every minute or so exactly, patient, like whatever was out there was used to waiting. I went to the door and locked it. Then I locked the back door. Then I went around and closed every curtain. The voice changed while I was doing this. It got younger. It started sounding like my mother from 20 years ago when I was a kid, when she'd call me in from the cul-de-sac at dusk. That was when my mouth went dry like I'd swallowed dust, because my mother hasn't sounded like that in 2 decades. Whatever was using her voice was reaching back into a memory I had never told anyone. Not Rents, not my ex, nobody. I went up to the loft and sat against the wall with my back to the chimney brick. I left every light on in the cabin. I didn't sleep, I just listened. Around 3, the voice stopped calling from the trees. I almost felt relief. Then I heard it on the porch. Holloway, right outside the door. Soft. The boards didn't creak. Whatever was on that porch had no weight or knew exactly how to step. It said my name, my mother's voice, for almost an hour, sometimes pleading, sometimes laughing like we were sharing a joke. Sometimes just my name, over and over, low and wet like it was practicing. I stayed in the loft. I didn't make a sound. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. It left at first light. I don't know how I knew it was gone, but I did. The air in the cabin changed, got lighter. I came down the loft ladder shaking so hard I missed 2 rungs. When I opened the front door, there was a small circle of leaves on the porch boards, arranged in a perfect spiral. In the center of the spiral was a sparrow with its wings folded neatly behind it. It wasn't dead. Its eyes followed me. It just couldn't move, like something had pinned it there without touching it. I packed in maybe 4 minutes. I left the cabin unlocked, the lights on, my unfinished paperback on the couch. I walked the trail down to the road. I walked the road. I walked nearly 6 miles before I got cell signal and called Beatrix. When I told her what had happened, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry. It's been a while since it asked for somebody." I didn't ask her what she meant. I didn't want her to tell me. When I got back to my apartment in Indianapolis, I called my mother just to hear her real voice. She answered after 2 rings. She sounded exactly like she'd sounded my whole life, not like the voice from the porch, not even close. And that's the part I can't shake. That thing wasn't doing a perfect impression. It was doing a memory, my memory. I don't know how it got in there. I never went back to the Smokies. A week later, I found a single dry oak leaf inside my sock drawer. I live on the 4th floor. Story 3. My sister Ainsley and I split the cost of the cabin as a birthday gift for our father. He just retired from 31 years of driving long haul, and the only thing he'd ever said he wanted was a few quiet days in the mountains. We picked a spot near Maggie Valley because the listing mentioned a creek you could hear from the porch. Dad loves the sound of water. The drive up was uneventful. Dad slept in the back seat with his cap over his eyes, which he never used to do. He'd been a driver his whole life, always behind the wheel, and Ainsley and I took turns navigating. The cabin was on a ridge above an old logging road. The host, a man named Dell, had left it stocked with firewood and a pamphlet about local hiking trails. One trail, marked on the map in red pen, had the words "Closed, do not use" written next to it in the same hand. I noticed it but didn't think about it. People close trails for all kinds of reasons. Erosion, bears, whatever. The first day, Dad sat on the porch and listened to the creek for about 6 hours. He looked happy in a way I hadn't seen since Mom died. Ainsley made spaghetti. We played gin rummy. It was perfect, honestly. I wish I could end the story there. The second morning, we decided to hike. Not the closed trail. We took the easy loop Dell had marked in green. About a mile in, the loop crosses a fire road, and Ainsley wanted to follow the fire road for a bit because she could see a clearing through the trees. Dad and I went with her. The clearing wasn't a clearing, it was a foundation, an old chimney standing alone with the burned outline of a house around it in the dirt. The kind of thing you find all over those mountains, homesteads from the 30s, abandoned when the park took the land. We poked around it for a few minutes. Dad found a horseshoe. Ainsley found a rusted spoon. I found a hairbrush. That's the detail I keep coming back to. A hairbrush. Wooden handle bore bristles, dark hair still tangled in it. It was sitting on the chimney hearth like someone had set it down and walked away. The hair in it was long and looked freshly oiled. Not decades old. Not even years old. I didn't pick it up. I don't know why. Some part of me just knew not to touch it. Ainsley wanted to, and I told her no, sharper than I meant to. She gave me a weird look but listened. Walking back, I felt the woods change. That's the only way I can describe it. The birds got quiet. The light got grayer even though the sun was up. Dad started walking faster and he wasn't in great shape. He'd had a knee replacement 2 years prior, but he was almost jogging. When I asked him why, he said, "I just don't like it back there." That was all. He didn't elaborate. We made it back to the cabin and the rest of the day passed normally except for one thing. Around dusk, Ainsley went out to the porch to read and came back in maybe a minute later. She said, "There's a woman across the creek." I went to look. There was nothing across the creek, just trees and rhododendron. Ainsley said the woman had been standing very still, watching the cabin with long dark hair down to her waist. She said the woman hadn't moved at all, and that was what had spooked her, not the watching but the not moving. We locked everything that night. Dad was the one who suggested it, which surprised me. He's the kind of man who leaves doors unlocked on principle. Around 2 in the morning, something started brushing the side of the cabin. Long, slow strokes, not scratching, not knocking, brushing, like someone running a hand down the wood siding from the roof to the foundation, over and over. The same wall, the wall closest to the creek. Ainsley came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed without a word. Dad came in next. The three of us sat there listening to it for I don't know how long, maybe an hour. The brushing kept moving slowly along the wall and then it would start at the top again, top to bottom, then very softly we heard it on the roof. It was lighter up there, not footsteps exactly, more like someone dragging long strands of something across the metal. Hair was what my mind kept saying. Hair, hair, hair. I tried to think of any other explanation and I couldn't. It sounded exactly like a long mass of hair being dragged across a tin roof. Dad whispered, "Don't go to the windows." Ainsley was already crying without making any sound, just tears running down her face. The dragging on the roof went on for maybe 20 minutes. Then it stopped, and we heard a single heavy thump on the porch, like something dropping down off the roof and landing on its feet. The porch boards groaned under weight that felt all wrong, too much for any person. Then nothing. For the rest of the night, nothing at all. At first light, we packed and left. Dad walked a careful path to the truck, never looking up. Ainsley and I followed him. None of us spoke until we hit the highway. When I unloaded the truck back at home, I found a single long dark hair wrapped around the handle of my suitcase, knotted 3 times. I'd zipped that suitcase shut myself in the bedroom with the door closed. Dad doesn't talk about that trip. He still listens to creak sound recordings to sleep. But if anyone suggests another cabin, he just shakes his head real slow and changes the subject. I don't push him. I think he knows something he hasn't told us, and I think he's keeping it to himself for our sake. Story 4. The Airbnb near Gatlinburg looked nothing like the photos. That was the first thing my boyfriend Terk said when we pulled up. The listing showed a sleek A-frame with floor-to-ceiling windows. The actual cabin was an A-frame, sure, but it was older, and the windows were tinted dark from the inside, almost black. We later found out the inside of every window had been painted over with a thin layer of charcoal-colored paint. The host, a guy named Roan, had mentioned in his message that he was doing some renovations and the windows would be sorted soon. We figured we'd manage. We were only there for 2 nights. Terk is an architect. He notices things about buildings that other people miss, and he was uneasy from the moment we walked in. He kept running his hand along the door frames, frowning. When I asked what was wrong, he said, "The proportions are off. The hallway is too long for the footprint." I didn't know what to do with that information. I just unpacked. That night, we made dinner and watched a movie on Terk's laptop. The cabin was warm, the fire was going, and I was almost relaxed when I noticed that the hallway leading to the bedroom looked longer than it had when we arrived. Like noticeably. I'd walked it twice already, and now it stretched at least another 5 or 6 feet with a corner I didn't remember. I told Terk. He went and looked, and his face did this thing where he tried to keep it neutral and couldn't. He said, "I want to leave." Just like that, no explanation. No, let's check it out. Just, "I want to leave." It was 11 at night. The road back was 40 minutes of switchbacks. I said, "In the morning, first thing." He agreed, but he wasn't happy about it. We barricaded the bedroom door with a chair. We didn't talk about why, we just both did it. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They started at the front of the cabin and walked toward the bedroom. They were slow and even. Then they stopped. Then they walked again, slower this time, then stopped. The pauses got longer each time. I counted the steps. 12 the first round, 18 the second, 27 the third. The hallway was only supposed to be about 15 feet long. Terk had his hand over his mouth. He's not a fearful person. He's the calmest man I know, and he was breathing through his fingers like he was trying not to be heard. Whatever was walking the hallway didn't try the bedroom door. It just kept making that loop. We later figured out that there was no loop. The hallway dead-ended at our door. Whatever was out there was walking back and forth a distance that shouldn't have existed. Around 3, Terk pulled out his phone and turned the camera on just to record audio. He pointed it at the door. The footsteps came again, slow, slow, slow. They stopped right outside our room. And then we heard a voice say, very quietly, in a tone like someone reading a label, 2. Just that, 2. Then it walked away. And the steps faded down a hallway that had no business being that long. We didn't sleep. At first light, Terk pulled the chair away from the door and we crept out. The hallway was the original length, 15 feet, straight shot to the living room, no corners, no extensions. We were almost out the front door when Terk stopped and pointed at the wall by the entryway. There was a small chalk mark there, low near the floor, a vertical line, and next to it a fresh chalk mark, still powdery. A second vertical line, 2 tally marks. We didn't take pictures. We didn't look any further. We threw our bags in the car and drove. Terk nearly went off the road 3 times on the switchbacks because he kept checking the rearview mirror. When we got home and unpacked, my toothbrush was missing from my toiletry bag. In its place was a small piece of folded paper. On the paper, in pencil, in the same handwriting that had made the chalk marks, was the number 2 with a question mark next to it. I threw the paper away. I threw the toiletry bag away. Terk won't stay in any house with an interior hallway anymore. We rent ground floor apartments only, open floor plans, sight lines from every room. The listing was deleted within a month. Roan stopped responding to messages. When I tried to look him up, the profile was gone. I think about that voice sometimes, the flat way it said 2, like it was counting us, or counting how many times it had done this before. I started to think I understood which one, and then I realized I didn't want to. Story 5. This is going to sound made up, but I swear it happened exactly like I'm telling it. I rented a cabin near Cherokee, North Carolina by myself for a long weekend in early spring. I'd just gone through a divorce. My husband Wendell and I had split after 11 years, and I needed somewhere quiet to figure out who I was without him. The cabin was small, listed by a woman named Magnolia Faye, and the photos showed wildflowers in mason jars on every windowsill. The listing said the property had been in her family for 4 generations. That detail mattered to me. I wanted somewhere that meant something to someone. The drive was beautiful, dogwoods blooming, red buds out. I got there in the afternoon and Magnolia Faye herself was waiting on the porch. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with red hair pulled back in a bandana. She showed me around. She had a way of pausing at certain doorways, like she was listening for something before walking through. I didn't think much of it at the time. Before she left, she said, "There's an old well out back. It's covered, but please don't uncover it. Don't even stand on the cover for too long. The wood's not great." I said okay. I had no plans to mess with a well. I'd come to read. The first day I sat on the porch with a stack of books and a thermos of coffee that I'd brought from home. I didn't trust the coffee maker in the cabin. The coffee was too hot when I poured it, then too cold within 10 minutes, and I remember being annoyed about that, the kind of small irritation that distracts you from real things. That afternoon, I walked out back just to stretch. I saw the well. It was about 50 feet from the cabin, set in a patch of weedy grass, covered with a heavy wooden lid weighted down by 2 flat stones. I stood maybe 10 feet from it, and I could swear I heard breathing, not loud, just the soft, rhythmic in and out of someone sleeping, coming up through the wood. I went back inside. I told myself it was the wind moving through the well shaft. Old wells make weird sounds. I'd read that somewhere, probably. That night around 2 in the morning, I woke up because I heard a thump from outside, then a second thump, then a slow, wet, dragging sound across the porch. Right outside my window, I lay completely still. I had my phone in my hand. I didn't turn it on. I didn't move. I just listened. The dragging stopped at the front door. There was a long silence. Then very quietly 3 knocks, spaced about 10 seconds apart. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't answer. Of course I didn't answer, but my mind kept screaming at me to look through the peephole, and I kept refusing, and that battle in my head went on for what felt like an hour. Eventually, the dragging started again, going back across the porch, around the side of the cabin, and out into the yard. I went to the back window. I shouldn't have, I know that, but I did. There was something moving across the grass toward the well. It was low to the ground, the size of a large dog, but the wrong shape entirely. Limbs too long, bent the wrong way, like a person crawling on all 4s, but with the joints all reversed. Its skin was wet and pale and stuck to its body in folds, like it had been underwater for a long time. It was dragging itself with its arms mostly, its legs trailing behind it useless. It reached the well. It pushed the heavy stones off the lid with one swipe of its arm, those stones I couldn't have lifted with both hands. It pushed the lid aside, and then it crawled headfirst down into the well, and the lid slid back into place behind it like the well had pulled it shut. I stood at that window for I don't know how long. Eventually I walked on stiff legs to the kitchen, and I sat at the table until the sun came up. I didn't blink much. My eyes felt sticky. At dawn, I went outside. The 2 heavy stones were back on the wooden lid, exactly where they had been. The grass around the well was flattened in a circle, and on the porch boards leading from the front door to the backyard was a smear of dark, wet something that had soaked into the wood. It hadn't been there when I'd arrived. I packed and drove. I called Magnolia Faye from the road and told her I'd left early. She didn't ask why. She just said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Was it a bad night?" Like she already knew. 2 weeks later, a small package arrived at my house. No return address. Inside was one of the flat stones from the well lid, wrapped in newspaper. A note read in a careful hand, "It belongs to you now. I'm so sorry. MF." I buried the stone in a state park 3 counties away. I don't sleep with my windows uncovered anymore. And every once in a while, in the middle of the night, I think I hear breathing. Slow, rhythmic, in and out, coming up from somewhere I can't quite locate. Story 6. My buddies and I rented a cabin near Pigeon Forge for a bachelor party. There were 6 of us, me, the groom Aldrich, his brother Purnell, our friends Joaquin and Bishop, and Aldrich's coworker Whit. We'd known each other anywhere from 5 to 15 years. The cabin was big, 4 bedrooms, a hot tub, a pool table, the works. The kind of place that looks like a hunting lodge in the photos and is mostly empty inside in person. I'm Calder, by the way. I was the best man, which is why a lot of the planning fell to me, and why a lot of what went wrong feels like my fault, even though I know it's not. We got there Thursday night. We drank. We played cards. Purnell, who's a paramedic and the most level-headed of all of us, told us a story he'd heard from a hospice patient. A story about an old still up in the woods behind the property, supposedly used during Prohibition. He'd been told there were old paths still up there, maybe even some equipment. By Friday afternoon, we were bored. 6 grown men in a cabin run out of things to do faster than you'd think. Aldrich suggested we go look for the still. I said it was a bad idea, not because I believed in any ghost stuff, but because I didn't want one of us to break an ankle on a holler nobody would find us in. I got outvoted. We took flashlights, water, and started up the slope behind the cabin around 3 in the afternoon. The path Purnell had been told about was real. Faint, but there. We followed it for maybe 40 minutes, climbing the whole way. We came out into a clearing with the old still in it, exactly like the patient had described. Copper pot, rusted coils, a stone furnace half collapsed, and ringed all around it on the trees at the clearing's edge were marks, carvings, not initials or hearts, symbols, geometric, jagged, repeating, cut deep into the bark, into the live wood. There were maybe 30 trees marked. The marks looked old, weathered gray, but on a few trees, fresher cuts had been made over the old ones. Recent, pale yellow wood showing through. Bishop said, "Let's go." Bishop is the biggest guy in our group, 6'5", 280, plays rec league football. When Bishop says, "Let's go," we go, but Whit lingered. Whit was the one we didn't know as well, Aldrich's co-worker, only along because his other groomsmen had backed out. Whit was taking pictures of the symbols. He said, "Just give me a second." Aldrich told him to hurry up. We started back down the path. About halfway down, we realized Whit wasn't behind us. We waited. We called his name. We waited some more. Purnell, the paramedic, was the one who finally said, "Something's wrong." We started back up the path. The clearing was empty. No Whit. His backpack was on the ground next to the still. His phone was in the backpack, the camera app still open on the last picture he'd taken. The picture was of one of the symbol trees, but in the corner of the frame, very out of focus, was a tall, pale shape standing between 2 trunks. It was hard to tell what it was. It could have been a trick of the light. It could have been a lot of things. We started shouting Whit's name. The clearing was small, maybe 40 feet across, and the woods around it were thick but not impenetrable. He could not have wandered far. We searched in pairs. We called and called. After about 20 minutes, Purnell whistled sharply and waved us over. He'd found something at the far edge of the clearing, near one of the freshly carved trees. It was Whit's left shoe, just the shoe, laces still tied, sitting upright on a flat stone like someone had placed it there. Joaquin started crying. Aldrich was trying to call 911 but had no signal. Bishop was scanning the tree line with his flashlight even though it was still daylight. And then, from somewhere uphill from the clearing, we heard Whit's voice. He was laughing, just laughing. The kind of laugh he had, a high-pitched, distinctive. It went on for maybe 10 seconds and then it stopped, and we heard it again from a completely different direction downhill behind us. I'm telling you, he couldn't have moved that fast, not on foot, not in those woods. Purnell said very calmly, "We're leaving now. We come back with rangers." Nobody argued. We hiked down the path faster than we'd hiked up. The laughing followed us, sometimes from the right, sometimes from the left, sometimes ahead of us. It was Whit's voice exactly. It was something close. It was a recording of him or a reading of him. We made it back to the cabin and drove to the nearest ranger station. They went up. They searched all that evening, all that night, and the next 2 days. They found Whit's backpack. They found the second shoe 3 miles from the first, on a ridge none of us had been near. They never found him. The official report said he'd wandered off and likely fell. The ranger who took our statement asked us twice, very carefully, whether any of us had heard anything unusual. I told him about the laughing. He nodded, didn't write it down, and changed the subject. I think he'd heard that kind of thing before. I drove home with Whit's phone in my glove box. The rangers had let us keep it for his family. When I got home, I plugged it into a charger and I scrolled through the photos one more time, looking for anything that might help. The last picture, the one with the pale shape between the trees, had changed. The shape was closer, not by a lot, just by a few feet, like it had taken a step toward the camera between when Whit took the picture and when I looked at it again. I deleted that photo. I shouldn't have. Whit's family asked for the phone and I gave it to them, and I never told them about the picture. I tell myself that was a kindness. Aldrich still got married. The wedding was small. None of us mentioned Whit except in the toast where Aldrich said his name once and couldn't say anything else. We all just drank. I haven't been back to the Smokies since. Story 7. My grandmother left me a piece of property when she passed 12 acres on the North Carolina side of the Smokies, with an old cabin on it that she'd been renting out on Airbnb for the last few years of her life. I hadn't known she was doing that. I found out from her lawyer. He gave me a folder of guest reviews, mostly 4 and 5 stars, a few odd ones. One review just said, "Beautiful place, we left early, sorry Annette." That was my grandmother's name. I'm Sable and I'm an accountant, and the practical thing was to keep renting the cabin out. I drove up in late summer to clean it, take inventory, and meet with the property manager, a quiet older man named Otho. The cabin was just as I remembered from childhood visits: front porch with a swing, river rock fireplace, the smell of cedar and old quilts. Otho walked me through everything: the water heater, the septic, the wood stove. As we were leaving, he stopped on the porch and said, "Your grandmother had a rule. The mirror in the back bedroom comes down before you sleep. There's a hook in the closet. You hang it facing the wall every night." I asked why. He said, "She just said to tell whoever inherited." I almost laughed. I didn't. I thanked him and he left. I stayed in the cabin alone that first night. I was going to be there for 3 days getting things in order. I didn't take the mirror down. I'm not proud of that. I told myself my grandmother had been superstitious. She'd burned sage in every room of her house every Sunday my whole childhood. She kept a horseshoe over every door. She told me once when I was 9 that a certain kind of moth meant a death in the family. I'd loved her and I'd loved her oddities, but I hadn't taken them seriously. I was an adult now. I worked with numbers. The mirror stayed. The first night I slept fine. That was almost the worst part, that nothing happened, so I felt smug about it. The second day I worked, cleaned the kitchen, sorted linens, made notes about repairs. The second night I went to bed around 11. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. exactly. I remember because I checked my phone. The room was very still. The kind of still that feels heavy. I sat up. The mirror on the back wall, a tall, dark-framed thing maybe 4 feet high, was reflecting the room as expected, except for one detail. The reflection of the bed had 2 people in it, me and someone else. Someone curled on their side facing me on the empty side of the bed. I looked at the actual bed next to me. It was empty. I looked back at the mirror. The other person was still there. I couldn't see their face. They were turned toward me, but their face was in shadow, or the mirror just refused to show it. I could see the outline of a body under the blanket. The blanket on the actual bed was flat, undisturbed. I want to tell you, I jumped up and grabbed the mirror right then. I didn't. I sat there. I stared at it. I tried to convince myself I was still asleep. I pinched the back of my own hand hard enough to leave a bruise that was there for a week. Then the figure in the mirror sat up. It moved like a person, smooth, normal, the way you'd sit up out of bed. The blanket fell away from its shoulders. I still couldn't see its face. Its hair was long and dark and hung forward. It swung its legs off the bed, the empty side of the actual bed, and stood up. In the mirror, I looked at the actual room. There was nothing there. The actual bed was empty. The actual floor was empty. But in the mirror, the figure was now standing beside the bed, and it took one step toward the mirror itself. I moved. I don't remember deciding to. I just remember I was suddenly out of bed on the floor, scrambling for the closet. I yanked the closet door open. There was the hook Otho had described, screwed into the closet wall. There was a piece of soft cloth folded on the shelf, dust-covered, like it had been waiting a long time. I ran back to the mirror. The figure in the reflection was at the foot of the bed now, walking slowly, deliberately toward the mirror's edge, toward me. I grabbed the mirror frame with both hands. The wood was cold, really cold, not just cool, and I lifted it off its nail and turned it to face the wall and somehow dragged it the 8 feet to the closet without ever looking at the glass again. I put the cloth over it. I hung it on the hook. I shut the closet door. I put a chair in front of the closet door. I sat on the chair. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I just sat in that chair until light came through the window. In the morning, I called Otho and asked him to meet me. When he arrived, I was packed, sitting on the porch. I told him what had happened. He nodded like a man hearing a forecast he'd expected. He said, "Your grandmother used to say it wasn't her, the one in the mirror. She didn't know who it was, she just knew you couldn't let it see you." I asked him why she kept the cabin if she knew. She said as long as the rule was followed, it stayed where it was. She didn't want to leave it for someone else to find. I left that day. I called the property manager service and pulled the cabin from Airbnb. I haven't sold the property. I don't know if I can. I drive up once a year in daylight to check the structure and make sure the closet is shut. The mirror is still in there. I've never opened the door. The week after I came home, I unpacked my suitcase and found a single dark hair caught in the zipper. Long, coarse. Not mine, I'm blonde and my hair is fine. I burned it in the kitchen sink. The smell was wrong, like burning hair, but underneath something else, something older. I started to think I knew what it was, and then I made myself stop thinking. Story 8. The last story isn't mine, it's my brother, S. His name was Linus, and he died 3 years ago in a car accident that had nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you. But before he died, he wrote down what happened to him at an Airbnb near Bryson City, and after the funeral my parents gave me his journals and I read it, and I want to tell it the way he wrote it as best I can. He'd want someone to know. Linus was a wildlife photographer. He went up to the Smokies that October to shoot elk during the rut. He'd booked a small cabin on the southwest side, listed by a couple named Hertha and Cyril, who lived in the main house up the hill. The cabin was meant to sleep two, but Linus was alone. He had a thing after his divorce about going alone, said it cleared his head. His first entry was bright. He described the drive, the way the leaves were dropping in showers when the wind hit. He wrote about meeting Hertha, who he said had eyes that were too kind, like she was sorry about something before she'd even said hello. Cyril he described as quiet, watchful, a man who looks at the woods more than he looks at people. Linus had a writer's way about him, even though he didn't write for a living. The first 3 nights were uneventful. He photographed elk in a meadow about a mile from the cabin. He got some of the best shots of his career. There's a picture of a bull elk in fog that he was particularly proud of. It hangs in my parents' hallway. On the 4th night, he wrote that he heard something walking around the cabin. Not heavy, light, barefooted was how he described it. He tried to dismiss it. He even went out with a flashlight, found nothing, and went back to bed. On the 5th night, he wrote, the elk in the meadow were gone. All of them. He'd been photographing the same herd for 4 days, learning their patterns. They didn't show up at all on the 5th evening. He wrote, the meadow felt watched. I don't know how else to put it. The grass moved in places where no wind was. On the 6th night, his entry was longer. I'm going to summarize because his handwriting got bad at the end and some of it I can't make out. He woke up around 1 a.m. to a tapping on the cabin window, the bedroom window, a soft, deliberate tap, like a fingernail on glass. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. The tapping was coming from outside, but the bedroom window was on the 2nd floor of a small loft. There was no porch on that side, nothing to stand on. He got up. He went to the window. He pulled the curtain back maybe an inch. There was a face on the other side of the glass. He described it carefully in his journal, like he was trying to get it right for a court record. He said the face was at his eye level, which would have meant it was floating 8 or 9 feet off the ground. He said the skin was the color of birch bark, pale, but with darker vertical streaks running down it. He said the eyes were closed, the mouth was closed, the nose was very narrow and long. The hair on the head was wet, plastered down, and looked dark green. He said it opened its eyes. There were no eyes. There were just deeper places where eyes should have been. He dropped the curtain. He backed away from the window. He heard the tapping continue for a few more minutes, and then it stopped. He didn't sleep. He waited for first light. At dawn, he went outside to look at the ground beneath the bedroom window. There were no footprints, no marks on the cabin wall, no way for anything to have been at that height. He packed and drove down to the main house to give Hertha and Cyril the key. Hertha answered. He told her briefly what had happened. He said in his journal, she didn't act surprised, she acted relieved. She told me, "You did right not to open the window." I almost asked her what she meant, but I didn't. I drove home. Linus drove all that day, 10 hours straight, back to his apartment in Charlotte. He wrote in his journal that night, and then he went to bed. The last entry in the journal, written the next morning, is short. I'll read it as he wrote it. "I dreamed of the face all night. In the dream it was on the inside of the window looking out. I was the one outside. When I woke up there was a wet smear on the inside of my bedroom window, about 8 feet off the ground. I don't have a ladder in my apartment. I cleaned it with a paper towel. The paper towel smelled like creek water. I'm putting this journal in the desk drawer. I don't want to write any more. I think I made a mistake by looking. I don't think looking is something you can take back." Linus lived 2 more years after that entry. He never went back to the Smokies. He never took another photograph of wildlife at night. The car accident that killed him was on a sunny afternoon on a stretch of road he'd driven 1,000 times. The police said he'd swerved suddenly, like to avoid something in the road, but no animal was found. I still have his journal. I keep it in a fireproof box in my closet. I've thought about throwing it away, burning it maybe, but every time I pick it up to do it, something stops me. A few months ago, I found a single dark green hair on the cover of the journal. It hadn't been there the last time I'd opened the box. The box had been locked. The key is on a chain around my neck, and it never leaves me. I've started to think I understand what's happening, and then I stop because I don't, and I think the not understanding is the only thing keeping me safe. Thanks for watching tonight. If these stories unsettled you, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next batch. Drop a comment and tell me which one stayed with you the longest, and share this video with anyone who loves a slow-burning scare. Until next time, lock your doors, leave your porch light on, and stay safe out there.